All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Josh's Game Grit. This will be episode the 41st, and we got a bit of a long-running slash popular topic, at least for me, this week. I want to talk about sort of asymmetrical player objectives and scenario design in particular. Now, I know often our Wednesday stream with Dylan is generally about sort of the game mechanics and that sort of thing, where a lot of my streams tend to be sort of graphics and production type stuff. But I also do an awful lot of development work and have done for the entire time. So it's a bit of a mixed bag with what you're going to get out of this stream. I'm not sure. Sometimes we'll talk about game design. Sometimes we'll talk about art. But specifically, I think I want to talk about scenario design because it is where most of the content of a game actually exists. Once you have kind of the core kind of rulebook stuff figured out, the core loop of how the game plays, a lot of kind of what happens after that is content design and creation, which, to be honest, is a lot of actual just development. Like, you're just literally churning away through core mechanics that work and bolting more content on top of them. This is exactly how Heroes of the Aturi Cluster was made. The only difference was I didn't design the core game of X-Wing. I just basically started developing and adding content to it. I see we have some of our usuals in the chat. Hello, Jared and Arjun. And I see TK and Ryan and Richard has joined us as well. Welcome all. And if you're lurking from one of the other communities, either for this game, which we haven't really talked much about yet, or this thing, then by all means you're in the right place. So if you're just joining us, I guess the question that I'm curious about from your perspective is, what do you think, what is like a really memorable scenario that you've played in a video game or board game? Like in video game, maybe it's like more of a mission or like a particular quest, but in a board game, it tends to be one particular objective or scenario you set up. What are some really interesting ones that you have played or that are really memorable to you for the experience that they managed to create? This is something I'm really interested in because the whole reason to have a game with different scenarios and different content in the first place is to have that variety, so that every time you go and open that box and go to play, you know the sort of flavor. You're opening that game because you want a particular flavor, and that's what you're going to unbox, set up, and play, or load up, boot up on your PC, whatever. You want that particular like style of experience, but you might not necessarily know exactly what that experience is going to be. Like, you want to still be surprised, right? Because otherwise, and at least in my experience, the game gets a little bit stale. And a lot of the best games I've found are the ones where, even with the same setup, they create novel and unusual and varied experiences just by virtue of how the pieces fit together. I see Eugen Storm has joined us. Hey man, it's been a while. When is the next stream about Angel the board game or another Buffy game? That's an interesting question that I'm going to actually dodge for now, sorry. I think soon. There's some stuff going on in the background that we haven't talked too much about yet, and it's probably going to be... you'll be seeing more of it for sure, but it's currently kind of gone quiet for a time. Oh, hey, Dylan has joined us. Dylan, you are slacking. What happened to your 1 hour window that we ate 90 minutes of? Oh, right, that. Richard says, I'm pretty obvious with Kingdom Death Monster, the first Nemesis battle against the Butcher. Yeah, so Nemesis is, I think, a really good example of one of the kind of styles of how you can build scenario content, right? Like, the total design space for Kingdom Death in terms of what they accomplish with certain scenarios or how the scenarios are laid out, because you're always bringing a team of survivors to go and fight a monster, the whole game is sort of hinges on how interesting and diverse the monsters are, right? That is it's not really a story scenario so much as this is the one new opponent we're going to fight. How different does it make me play? Or how different am I going to have to set up my team? Or what are the considerations around what I'm going to have to bring into that fight to make it an interesting battle, right? Dylan also says, besides, I need to know what you are volunteering me for. No. It's fine. You just get surprised by things, like when you miss meetings. Eugene says, I like the way you paint and the design style. Well, thanks, man. I'll have to do some more art illustration stuff. I don't know if it'll be in my usual Friday time slot or not. I've been thinking about doing some other tutorial work as well. And certainly there's no shortage of projects with art upcoming that we might get back to talking about. And it's a weird, like, wearing many hats sort of situation where right now there are a couple of projects at, like, really early stage. There's a couple of projects at, like, middle development where the game is done and we're putting art on them. And there's a couple of projects that are, like, late stage development in tandem with art. And, like, that's sort of where Divinity is, right? And a few other, like, Gemini Gauntlet is basically done. So we have kind of a few different projects across this range right now. And you never really know which part of the range I'm going to sort of pick for a given topic. But by all means, if there's something that you particularly want to know more about, or you think it might be cool to hear a stream about a particular topic or a particular game, by all means, subscribe to the channel and or drop me a comment below, and I'll dig through those to find topics for upcoming streams. So that's totally something we can do going forward, and I love having things to talk about. The many hats is usually a good source, but I'm also kind of interested about tailoring this to what you think is going to be interesting, or the sort of things that you're super interested in. James, whoa, logging in only, capital only, to say, since Dylan won't, that I really like this idea and you should surprise him more. Brackets, hi Josh. Hi James, thank you. Yes, we should surprise Dylan more, because he doesn't, the last thing he needs is more curveballs. I'm glad Dylan's here, though. This is good. So yeah, scenario design stuff. And I see a few more from... someone mentioned Terminator Genisys. Thank you, TK1138. The mission from Genisys where you have to drive the truck to the other side of the board has always stuck out for me. That's one that I'm super proud of. That mission was very difficult to balance, and it was... So a little more context about this mission. So Terminator Genisys is a cooperative game, 1 to 4 players, 5 with the expansion, although this is a core game scenario, where it's your typical running through a set of tiles dungeon kind of setup where you're rolling dice to assign them to do moves, you're rolling dice to shoot things, and you're kind of you're juggling the order that players take turns, because every player has corresponding a horde of corresponding Terminators that will respond to their turns. And all of the scenarios in the game, or the majority of them, are just a squad of 4 characters running around the map on foot, and basically just trying to either grab something or destroy enough guys to hold off a certain amount of time. But the particular scenario TK1138 is talking about is a curious one, and it's also memorable for me, and I remember filming it on the Kickstarter for Terminator Genisys. I think we did a live stream during that Kickstarter, and we featured this scenario. But basically, the mission is you take all of the tiles in the game, you make them into one really long roadscape across the whole table. It's like, 4 feet long by the time you lay all the tiles end to end. And you start off with this tile that occupies 5 hexes in an X shape. And the squad of characters have to get the truck to the other end. And there's a whole set of rules in Terminator about this truck. And they're actually in the main rulebook, not even just limited to this one scenario, even though the truck is kind of a special rule more than a core mechanic. But the amount of effort and development time that went into making that truck really fun and quirky and kind of unseen, something fresh, something new in a game that would otherwise just be a squad, like adding vehicles is like what happens when Battlefront or Battlefield came along and did, what it did to first-person shooter video games, where all of a sudden I can hop in a vehicle and do something. that was very much what we tried to accomplish with adding this truck to Terminator. And it helped with the variation, for sure. It let us tell a couple of cool stories. And it also seemed weird, before we made that scenario, it seemed weird to me that we had this whole fiction that John Helfers was writing for Terminator Genisys for us. Thank you, John, for doing a fantastic job, by the way. I will never not praise him for that. I think he just absolutely home-runned it. But there's a lot of stuff in this fiction about the truck, or the squad has this truck. So the first mission is like you're breaking into a dilapidated army base to steal a truck. And then the second mission is like you're being chased, so you hop out of the truck and the truck goes somewhere else off in Storybook Land, and then you have to go this little like underground dungeon portion to regroup with the truck. So there's like the truck, and we're like, you know what? At some point the truck has to make an actual appearance. The truck has to actually be on the table, and we actually have to do a scenario where you get to drive the truck. And then I realized as soon as we implemented it and tried it, that there were going to be a whole host of rules edge cases because this truck has to interact with like road killing the enemies. But it's really satisfying when you do it. So one of the first things that happened with the truck is like the different spaces on the tile are seats that you pile the team into. So there's one person who can drive the truck. They're the only person that can move it because they're in the driver's seat hex. The person in the passenger seat hex comes along for free and can do whatever they want. It's almost like being in the side of the Warthog in Halo. And I would be remiss if I didn't admit to stealing some of the design concept of Halo and the Warthog when we put the military truck into Terminator Genisys. Because you have a driver, a passenger, and a gunner, actually. One of the missions you get a turret on top. And somebody in the truck can man the turret, which is just a big gun that is better than your standard infantry-sized firearms. So there's this whole thing about, like, sometimes you're activating the characters in a particular order just so you can properly hot switch who's in like which seat of the truck and being able to do what, which is really, it added a really fun dimension to that scenario because it was such a departure from the rest of the game. And I feel like we did a pretty good job of integrating it and making it a unique, cool little thing. And I think there is one, I don't quite remember now. I think there's a mission later on as well where you've busted into the compound at the end of the story, and there's two truck tiles in the game. One is flipped over and blown up, and the other one remains, but you can't drive it. You can only use the gun on top, which is, I'm pretty sure, straight from the film. But like, we tried to get a little bit more mileage out of it, and it was actually kind of a fun freebie because we had space on the punch board to have a second truck tile, and I was like, oh, if we're going to do that, I'm going to use it. Might as well do that, right? Waste no cardboard. Jared says, so we should just drop surprises on Dylan's front door. That might be a little too real. You can't really drop surprises on my front door. I live in an apartment, so you'd have to kind of find the unit and all of that. But Dylan, you might be able to surprise. Except I think Sif would probably call you out on it, and that would get hairy kind of quickly. The Shipyard has joined us. Hello, The Shipyard. Welcome to the stream. Says, really looking forward to seeing what Star Trek Alliance has to offer, especially in terms of co-op play and the player progression from Star Trek Attack Wing. So it's a little premature for me to start spoiling bits and pieces of Alliance on stream because I know it's kind of still in process with WizKids. Some pre-orders went up on the internet for it recently. So that I know for sure, like, the initial solicit has gone out, and I think probably we'll see it this year. That's my own kind of internal. My head math tells me we'll see it this year, but I actually don't know for sure because I haven't sort of received official word about it. But it was a surprising challenge to do the content for this game. Because the system upon which it was based, some of my previous work about Heroes of the Aturi Cluster, Heroes was totally built basically assuming that you had as much X-Wing as I did at the time, which was when this came out pretty early on in first edition X-Wing, and you played it with 6 players. If you look at that table there, this assumed that you had 8 TIE fighters, a TIE interceptor. Some of the later scenarios get a little ridiculous in terms of their requests. This one is You can have multiple elite enemies. This is a favorite, the HoloNet receiver mission. But there's lots of different ways to upgrade to other ship types in this scenario. So I think at this point, when I designed and tested most of Heroes of the Aturi cluster, I probably owned like 8 TIE fighters and 6 TIE interceptors and, I think 3 TIE defenders and 4 bombers. Like I have a case, a plastic tackle box that's full of Imperial StarCraft. So running Heroes is easy for me. I just bust out that bin, set up all the ships, and then we play them as they come. But Alliance was a weird situation because that X-Wing collection, to buy that at retail and have that much stuff as a play box to design content for and to design stories for, was really, like, I could do anything. Because it was just like, oh, what am I going to get out of my collection and do? But as soon as you switch that paradigm to needing to have everything in one box and needing the end player to be able to reasonably buy that box and buy into this idea, which is what happened with Attack Wing, because Attack Wing never had campaign play. The closest it had was like organized play kits with some scenarios in them that were basically the standard sort of, here's the rules for competitive play and building a squad and putting upgrades on your stuff, the point buy system that you see in most war games. They were just additional objectives or different ways of setting up those war games. There's not too much in the way of special rules because most of those scenarios fit on a single playing card. And when you've only got that much space, there's a limit to how much you can do, right? You have to be very creative about how much you can squeeze out of the available cardboard or paper that you're printing on, because as much as it's awesome to have a huge variety of special rules, they all take ink. Like, they take space to actually communicate in a way that people are going to understand. So the big challenge for me with Attack Wing, in terms of the, developing more content for it or getting scenarios for it, was just how the heck do you have enough of whatever the thing is that I need in the box to be able to play this? And is it possible to design something like the scenario that I did for Heroes using only a core set? And that turned out to be a surprisingly big headache. It was actually a bit of a challenge because Heroes goes to 6 players. As soon as you put enough models in a box for a flight path game like Heroes or X-Wing or Attack Wing, as soon as you take one of those 2 games and put enough models in the box for 6 people to play, all of a sudden that box has to cost $80. But as a brand new game to get into with automated opponents, it's really tough to ask someone to spend, in my opinion anyway, $80 to get into that game. So we had the brainwave of figuring out, well, it doesn't have to be a 6-player game. It can be a 2-player game. Because now instead of the other core sets for X-Wing and for Star Trek Attack Wing are all 2-player core sets. I think actually the original Attack Wing one was a 3-player core because it had the Federation, the Klingons, and the Romulans. But the thing that got weird about it was just figuring out how to condense it all down. So when we got this idea to make the starter set a 2-player only game, but the scenario book is laid out the same way as the one for Heroes, where you've actually got, and I'll show you, I actually don't know if you guys have seen this. I'll show you this one. This might be really familiar to those of you who have played Heroes of the Aturi cluster. This mission is called A Simple Patrol. So in Heroes of the Aturi cluster, this is basically an homage to Heroes of the Aturi cluster's introductory mission called Local Trouble. And this has, essentially, if you look at this grid, it is theoretically possible to place, 11 Jem'Hadar fighters on this mission. And I was like, well, if we want a mission that has this kind of content for 6 players, I don't see how we're going to do that. It just doesn't work. There's no way that I can reasonably make a core set style product that has 11 Jem'Hadar fighters in it. I can't design that scenario for 6 players. But for 2 players, if that scenario only has 5 ships, and we assume that some of them are going to be destroyed because they're rushing you and you have to fight them, maybe I can do it with 3. So this is how Star Trek Alliance actually kind of came to be. We got this whole that we kind of managed to simplify everything down to what is the bare minimum product that two people can play the story with. And if they want to, or if multiple people buy in, or you buy a couple of these core games, you actually get enough content to multiply it. So if you want to play 4 players, you get 2 copies of the core game. You want to play 6 players, you get 3 copies of the core game. And that is everything you need for all the players. And it's enough Jem'Hadar attack ships to be able to play the scenario at any of those sizes. But it was really quickly obvious to me that the scenarios were going to be really boring if the only thing we would get out of the scenario design was Jem'Hadar fighters. There was pretty quickly we actually hit a wall in terms of like, okay, well, how do you make Jem'Hadar fighters interesting and varied all the time? And the biggest way to do this, at least in Heroes of the Ituri cluster in X-Wing, was it was primarily with other ship types. So we had, I had my whole toy box of umpteen Imperial Starfighter variations. So I was like, oh, this scenario, it's going to be half as many enemies, but they're all TIE interceptors. That scenario feels different and cool just because, by virtue of the fact that X-Wing is well developed, and TIE interceptors are different and feel different and interesting compared to regular TIE fighters. Perfect. That scenario works. So something like, I think it's called Revenge. I have to check my book. It's been a while since I've played this mission. Yes, the X-Wing Heroes scenario called Revenge. You fight a squadron of TIE interceptor aces in a nebula because they're not particularly happy about you blowing up their base. But that scenario works and is interesting by virtue of, I think half of it at least, is the fact that you've got all of these TIE interceptors instead of a regular TIE fighter group, and they're all loaded up as aces, so they have additional special abilities. And that was the first thing that we looked at when doing the scenarios for Alliance. It was, okay, well, if I'm going to use the same models, how do I get more mileage out of them? And it turned out that, changing the timing of when they show up, where they show up, what equipment they have on them. So most of the Jem'Hadar attack ships you find are just like TIE fighters. They have nothing on them. Like, they're bare bones. They don't have special abilities. They're just the hull of the ship. Captain Skill 1, Pilot Skill 1. I'll translate back and forth between Star Trek Flight Path and Star Wars Flight Path. But the design space really quickly got into this whole, like, okay, well, if we make some of them better, we just, increase their captain skill and give them a special power, we can make all of these special powers fun and new and original, because I'm not particularly concerned about being constrained to what exists in Attack Wing, because I don't want to have to deal with point buying and balancing what the AI ships have on them. No. It's more interesting if I can write the AI abilities from scratch, because then I can make them extremely directive and prescriptive. And then you can get into okay, well, it's really easy to resolve this ability because I just read the text and do what it says. Whereas if you try and build an AI ship out of existing Attack Wing cards and you say, oh, it has, what is that weapon called? Is it the Polaron Beam? There's a weapon for the Jem'Hadar ship that ignores shields. And when human players play with that ship, they tend to prioritize flying it and its targeting differently because they want to take advantage of that upgrade. That's really obnoxious to have to build into the AI and maneuvering choices for a ship if it's going to try and factor in how to use an upgrade. So if you just use the card from a standard competitive game that's normally going to be operated by a human, you get this weird problem of yes, I know what the ship can do, but I don't know what the ship should do. If it's cooperative, and the point of Attack Wing Alliance is that, or of Star Trek Alliance, is that it is totally cooperative, it's really important to me, and I'll say this every time about co-op games, it's really important to me that you spend almost no time moving the enemy pieces or updating the game state. The majority of your efforts should be focused on, this is a cool puzzle we've been presented with, I think we're screwed, how do we get out of this? And the more that you have to update the game or maintain what's got what or make decisions about which ships should do what with their upgrades, it very quickly gets away from that feel and sort of prevents you from getting caught in that flow of just playing your turns back to back to back to back. I mean, to be honest, I know board gaming is a totally different thing from video games, but flow within board games and how that kind of evolves is something I'm always kind of cognizant of, because I want to make it as smooth as possible, right? Arjun and Dylan having a whole little conversation in the chat. I'm glad you clarified that, Arjun, that you're not just bored of Dylan's content. That's good. Phased Polaron Beam, the shipyard says, is the Jem'Hadar upgrade. So yeah, that's definitely part of it. How do we get that mileage out of having so few pieces in the box? And I did, because it was a 2-player starter and they both need a ship to play, it pretty quickly condensed to, okay, well, we're going to make 2 Federation ships. Those are going to be the players. We'll make them different because we can, and then they'll play differently and feel kind of interesting and each have a battlefield role. That seems good. That will help with scenario design. And if you already own one or both of these models, nothing is stopping you from using your existing collection and having both of you fly. In this case, the 2 ships are an Akira class and an Excelsior class. Nothing is stopping you from adding in a model from your collection that, you already have one of these and playing that in the game. You can have a whole squad of players running Excelsior class ships if you want. Totally doable. But I only have room in the box to give you 1 Excelsior. I can't give you 2 Excelsiors and 2 Akiras. That makes the product, the game box, more difficult to sell. And that's not what I want. I would much rather give you something small and hook you, and then you can take it from there if you really love it. And I hope you will. So, positioning and timing of enemies coming in, upgrades on enemies, and then the last sort of place we started looking at without being able to introduce more ship chassis or anything like that was some of the fun stuff we got into with Heroes. And I'll show you this scenario. This is a classic. This is the Secure HoloNet Receiver. I like this one in particular because it does a lot of stuff with the design space for flight path with a relatively small overhead in terms of special rules. There's a special rules paragraph here about how to set up an allied ship that flies along with you. There's a special rule for how you sift through a pile of special tokens and the various ramifications of doing so. And your objective is actually not to destroy any of the TIE fighters. That's totally superfluous. You destroy them in this scenario because you either are out of position to do something else or because they're actively getting in your way and killing you and you're trying to just thin the horde a bit. But the actual scenario for Secure the HoloNet Receiver in Heroes is about trying to find a token. You're trying to look at, fly around, get close to, look at, and actually lock down a particular token. And you do this by shooting at it with ion weaponry to stun it. And this was a really good... That scenario feels totally different than any of the straight-up dogfights in the game, by virtue of the fact that there's a whole brand new objective that isn't just trying to outsmart the AI and shoot it down. In that scenario, it is a legitimate strategy, and in many of them, it can be a legitimate strategy to try and bait the AI out of the way, and then swerve back to the objective and try and capture it, right? And by doing that, it's like, oh, all of a sudden, this is a totally different line of play than I was going to have otherwise. Jeff says, hint, make sure the token is actually in the pile. Yeah, I think maybe the setup instructions are not amazing on this, but certainly if you made that mistake during the setup portion for which one to put where, put numbered tokens 10, 11, and 12 in the bag. Yeah, so if you mix that up and you don't put 12, which is the one you have to find, I can see how that might be kind of a weird experience for you. That's kind of hilarious. The scenario is probably still fun. I would blame that on bad intel from the Bothan spies. I think that you should probably have words with them if they survived getting you that intel. But I would imagine that the rest of that scenario was probably still really fun because you tried to do it and then just ended up having a dogfight with some Imperial ships and then deciding eventually to go home. Unless you decided halfway through that you had made a mistake setting it up and kind of retconned it in. Let me know what you decided. This shipyard says it's about as bad as accidentally putting 3 Cylons in a game of Battlestar Galactica when you're only supposed to have 2. Yeah, that would be interesting. I played a game of The Resistance with somebody years and years ago, a group of like 3 or 4 people. So I didn't know any of them very well, but a couple of them were really tight friends. And I got the sense that they were big into like pranking each other every so often. And Resistance is a game where you, again, you make a fixed deck at the start, you shuffle in hidden roles, a particular distribution of them. So there's like 1 traitor and 4 rebels or whatever it is. It's been too long since I played the game. But you're supposed to make a specific distribution of roles and deal them out. And for fun, this person, because the game plays up to like 12 or however many people it is, the person setting it up winks at me before building the deck and flashes the deck of cards to me, and he's put all of the only cards in the deck are traitors. So there are no actual like rebels or players who are trying to win. Every single player has been dealt a traitor card this round, which of course broke the game, right? Completely broke the game. The game did not work as intended. Didn't really work at all, actually. But I remember this moment because it was so goofy, and because of what it did to all the players and how they responded to it. Because it was the first turn, people were like, "Huh, that's weird. That shouldn't happen. Why are they both doing that? Are there 2 traitors? Did someone just get a really bad card?" Like it's so confusing to people who've played the game because they expect certain sort of patterns of play, and they got completely subverted. And then in like round 2, people were like, "Something's wrong. What happened to this game? Why is it broken? This shouldn't happen. What?" And then we get like another round or so, and people are like, "Okay, did you set this up right?" And the friend is like, "Oh no, not at all. I just wanted to see what would happen." Love it. Chef's kiss. Mwah. Beautiful. If I could get that kind of variance of experience out of another game design by virtue of a cool scenario or a twist on a scenario, I'll do it. Because that's the stuff I love. Like, I asked you guys in the comments when I was posting this stream this morning, what's your most memorable experience or scenario that comes to mind? And like, not really a scenario, but like, I'm sure I've played other games of the Resistance since. I know I've played it at least a couple times. That's the only game of it I ever played that was memorable, and it was the one that was memorable because it was broken. So I think that really speaks to the power of like having an interesting scenario or getting that replayability out of. That's kind of fun. Also kind of interesting if you play a version that has no traitors. Yeah, that could kind of work. As long as the threat of the traitor is real. As long as you think someone could be a traitor. That's cool. And Evil Dead 2, our Evil Dead 2 board game does that as well. Because it plays off some of those same tropes. The idea of like, okay, are you a Deadite? Are you freshly a Deadite, or were you always a Deadite? And having that kind of interplay back and forth in the game added that kind of interesting social deduction layer onto the game that sort of prevented it from needing more than one overarching scenario. Because like you can get interesting experiences in scenario design by having more components, which is the way that was done in Heroes of the Aturi Cluster, which hopefully will eventually be done in Star Trek Alliance. But that is a model that is a substantial upfront investment in pieces and in writing more content and in balancing more things and adding more things to the game. It's great if you're a publisher because it means that as you release more content, it comes with new stuff that people also want. So, you're giving them new story and you're giving them new pieces. That's cool. And it's a great model because you can keep manufacturing and selling things. Yay, capitalism. And it's, a product model that's worked really well for all of the Flight Path games. X-Wing has certainly done really well off of having a million different kinds of ships as expansions, and particularly ones you want more than one of. So that's like a whole good business reason to do scenario design by components. But it's also a completely viable and sometimes even more interesting exercise to try and get a variety of scenario play and feel without introducing more components. And trying to do that in Star Trek Alliance, where I had to make all the scenarios interesting for 2 players, even though I could only have the 3 Jem'Hadar fighters, presented some cool challenges. I don't want to spoil too much about those scenarios, because I think part of the joy of that game is going to be playing through the campaign and discovering them. But there are a couple of scenarios that specifically have new cardboard bits. I actually can't remember off the top of my head what bits are that we did add. But there are 6 scenarios in the game. For a little core set, that's actually quite a lot of story content, particularly given that there's player progression and upgrading your ship as you play too. Heroes of the Aturi Cluster, the draft sort of beta version that I published back in 2015, had an introductory scenario and 15 missions, I think, plus a couple that were sort of hit the cutting room floor and never made it. So having a single core set that has already 6 missions in it is quite a lot by that comparison. Shipyard says, as long as it gives people a reason to think someone is working against them, they will run with it and they will assume that there is. Absolutely. We played a game of Texas Hold'em with a $20 buy, says Jared Mitz, in the first hand. Almost everyone turned out to be turned out to be a double pinochle deck. There you go. So they completely changed the actual setup of the game, and it messed with people. I love it. I love it. Jeff says, First edition Heroes of the Aturi Cluster was the best thing that ever happened in first edition. We played 6 full campaigns of it. Actually, that might be more campaigns than I've played. I think I've only played Heroes like maybe 4 times. I'm pretty sure some of the people who are still developing content for Heroes and who have been leading the charge into second edition Heroes of the Aturi Cluster have probably played it more than I have. And maybe they know it better. It might also just be the sort of thing that I do. It's really weird for me to play a game for a really, really long time. There are very few games that I have bought, owned, played, whatever, that have survived that long, or that I've continued to go back to and play. Very few. Board games that I still continue to go back and play are things like Dominion, maybe. I have a lot of Dominion, so that will continue to be fresh for a really, really long time. I kind of actually have stopped buying expansions for Dominion because the card pool is, with 7 or 8 expansions, frankly big enough. Basically what fits in one box. Also, like Race for the Galaxy, because I'm still finding there are interesting decisions and interesting cases in Race for the Galaxy with that one deck of 120 cards. Even, I think I've logged something like 400 plays of Race for the Galaxy, which is an awful lot. Like 120 of those are probably in person, and the rest are online multiplayer. But that is one of my very favorite games, and I think I will never get bored of it. I've played a lot of FTL, but not hundreds of hours of FTL on Steam. So the fact that I haven't played more than like 4 campaigns of Heroes of the Aturi Cluster end to end post-release, I'm not sure is really indicative. I did play an awful lot. I think I've played every scenario at probably every tier, sort of 2-player, 4-player, 6-player. I've played all of those permutations pretty extensively when testing it. There's a couple scenarios I know I haven't played as much because they were kind of last-minute late additions to the campaign, but the majority of them I've played to death, and it was actually really weird coming to Star Trek Alliance wanting to do more scenarios of the same type, because I looked at the stuff that I had cut from Heroes that I probably will never go back to and do anything with, but the stuff that didn't make the cut for Heroes, I went and looked at it and said, this is too weird, this is too complicated, or this doesn't fit the story I want to tell with what should be an introductory starter set to a brand new line of co-op campaigns. So like anything that has really complicated special rules, no, axed. Not putting that in first 6 scenarios of Alliance. If we do another box of this, and I'm hoping it does well enough and proves that it's a cool game that they'll print more of. If it does well and we get a chance to do more scenarios, and I'm hoping we do, then all of that comes back on the table, right? Because even though there is only the one box with the 8 or the 6 scenarios that were kind of planned out at the start, I think I have the rest for like a trilogy sketched out. In fact, I know I have at least the premise for all of them and the special rules hooks for all of them figured out because somebody at WizKids asked me about it 18 months ago. So that totally exists. Jeff says the reason Heroes lasted so long for them is it appealed to my friends who weren't great tactical players and not super competitive players, but who loved Star Wars, loved hanging out, and loved the models and the feel of it. So they never play competitive X-Wing, but they never got tired of playing Heroes of the Aturi Cluster. That is pretty much the way... I was a really competitive X-Wing player back in first edition. From the beginning, my first introduction to X-Wing was actually a tournament that I won. Because my friend gave me a squad of 4 X-Wings that he had been tinkering with, and he was running the event. So he was like, hey, take my squad, play with it. I didn't fully appreciate that he was giving me the keys to what would turn out to be the Wave 1 meta squad. But in hindsight, of course it was, because this is the kind of gamer my buddy R5 Donfor is. So I played a lot of competitive X-Wing kind of all the way through until about Wave 4 or Wave 5 in first edition. And I was still playing it competitively when I started the design. That would become Heroes of the Aturi Cluster. That's an interesting origin story that I'm sure I've talked about on stream before and can get into again in the future. But very much this whole kind of concept of I know at some point I'm not going to want to play competitive X-Wing again. And if all that exists for X-Wing is competitive play, my chances of onboarding somebody I meet in the future, or kids, or relatives, any of that, people who have never played X-Wing before, my chances of being able to onboard them to play a game of X-Wing with me, that's going to be fun for both of us, are 0. I'm not holding out hope there. I can pretty confidently say those chances are 0 because I own Monsterpocalypse, because I own Star Wars miniatures. Both of those big, heavy collectible games that I have full collections of that I'll probably never really play much of ever again. I love Monsterpocalypse. I think basically everything from first edition. It has seen the table once in the last 6 or 7 years. It's been in my closet in this apartment the whole time I've lived here, and I've busted it out once to play a game. So I know from experience that eventually collectible games go to die because they thrive on having this kind of continuous competitive scene where everyone is interested in playing at that level. But it's really hard to get people into the game when that's the only way to play it. And that was actually the driving force behind making Heroes of the Aturi Cluster in the first place. The fact that all of you got a really cool X-Wing campaign out of it is bonus for me, to be honest. I made it because I was like, oh, I have all these X-Wing models I really love. At some point, I'm going to want to share this cool Star Wars game with friends of mine, but I don't want to have to play against them. So how do we make it cooperative? Okay, well, we need an AI opponent. Well, AI opponents for dogfighting is kind of not very interesting, but if we build all the scenarios around it and tailor all the AI to play those scenarios against you really well, we circumvent all the issues with the AI ever being dumb. We can chalk that up to the fact that they're TIE fighters. There are a million of them. They get blown up left, right, and center in the original trilogy, so that all works. And then, beyond that, who doesn't want to be a pilot in control of an X-Wing or Y-Wing or your favorite Rebel starfighter, taking it to the big faceless Empire and leveling up and getting better? That steady drug drip of oh, I got an experience point. Oh, I'm going to use that to buy a new pilot upgrade. Oh, I'm going to use that to put torpedoes on. I'm going to get fancier astromech. It all just kind of worked together and gelled really, really well. And when we kind of got back to doing Alliance, it was a weird experience for me in a different way than just having to fit it into a small box. It was also... In X-Wing, I really liked all the upgrade cards in the game. No, maybe not all. There's a few in first edition that were a bit wonky and I felt weird about having in the game. But the majority of content in first edition I actually really liked, and they all seem to be very tightly balanced point-wise against each other. Credit to them, that's one of the things that Fantasy Flight is generally pretty good for, is overall balance on printed cards. Now, mind you, they've blown the escape hatch and decided not to do that in second edition, and that's a whole other story. So they clearly didn't have that much faith in their ability to do balancing act here. But I was totally fine with having all of the existing cards in the card pool and basically having everything available, because it made it easy for people to tinker with heroes, which is great if it's a free thing that anyone can build and play with any collection. But it also means that you have a really easy set of rules to explain to people how player progression works. If I give you a row of icons on a player sheet and I say, hey, here's what it costs to get this icon, and then you can buy any card that fits here, that's all you got it. That's the whole rule. There's nothing else to know about buying upgrade cards and heroes. So that turned out to be really, really good at teaching the game really quickly and immediately starting people's brains like theory crafting on how they were going to get into that loop. Didn't really have that luxury in Alliance. We had done early playtesting of the system and a lot of the proof of concepting of it using cards that were in the card pool. But the cool thing about working on a game like that and having the backing of the publisher and not just doing it as a fan-made homebrew is that one of the things WizKids said to us right early on was, hey, we want players that already own a lot of Attack Wing to have just a little more incentive to want to buy this box. Can you put upgrade cards or things that are playable in standard competitive play in this box that work for your campaign, because we know you don't like some of the existing upgrades, and I had made a point of saying like Attack Wing's card pool is so big and so complicated, and some of them are totally unbalanced and not well priced, that if we open up that card pool to everything that exists, the whole game is very quickly unhinged, and it's very, very, very easy for players to get a little carried away, purchase an upgrade with their points, put it on their ship, and now all of a sudden they're steamrolling the game because the power level doesn't work. I really, really wanted to avoid that. So that whole design push combined with getting into what we were going to need to do for the new cards that we had to actually design and put in there was the main reason why we ended up having basically brand new stuff. So I don't actually know if I can show you any of these. They're real exciting. Spoilers! The operations officer with the fantastic art. This is my prototype deck of all the cards I think this is 3 sets. This is a 6-player box for Alliance. But all of the new cards we ended up making was kind of fun because it let me take everything I knew and had learned about balancing stuff in Heroes of the Eturi cluster around, the point cost is not just what feels balanced in game, but also what feels appropriate for how much effort you have to go through to earn enough points to be able to buy the card in the campaign. Having those 2 pieces of data let me design those cards in a way that made much more sense for the competitive campaign that I was trying to put together, to have a power level that would be consistent across my own scenarios, and then also to have cards that would fit well and appropriately into the competitive play scene. One of the really big helps there is Attack Wing doesn't have the same size of competitive scene that X-Wing does. And there are lots of reasons for that. I don't feel strongly about getting into them. But the whole point of designing for competitive play and having that as one of our requirements meant that I got to recruit some friends who had played a bunch of Attack Wing and who knew the game really well. So I came to them with hey, here's what I think are cool upgrades to put into the game that makes sense within the context of the campaign. I would really like these to be our pool of 20 new cards that go in the box. What do you think they cost in competitive play? My head math tells me, from what I know about X-Wing and what I've played of Attack Wing so far, I think this is a 3-point card. What do you know about competitive play that will make or break that point value? And some of them, I think the main person I went back and forth with on this is Joseph Vanderyacht, who was one of the world champions of Attack Wing. He's actually local to Linvander's offices in Guelph. But he helped me go through a lot of the cards. And there were a few that I would be okay, here's a not very powerful effect. It's going to be 2 points. And Joe would get back to me and say, well, it probably makes sense in your campaign at 2 points, but there's this weird 3-card combo that exists in the current competitive play space of Attack Wing, where if you make this card 2 points, this whole thing is possible and is broken. So you should probably make it 4. And I said, okay, I'll make it slightly better and a little bit more situational for the campaign, and it'll be 4 points. And then just like that, we got abilities that worked well in the co-op portion and worked well in the competitive portion, and it all come together and worked out pretty well. Let's see, you guys are saying a few more things in the comments. The Shipyard says, games like X-Wing and Attack Wing need more than a competitive tournament. I really appreciate that co-op play exists or will exist because it brings in people without the knives coming out. I mean, yeah, that's part of it. I definitely think that's part of it. We saw the same thing with X-Wing post Wave 7. Yep, very quickly things get ridiculous and unbalanced. Art is a good name for an ops officer. There you go. Hopefully the engineer is Paul. Nice. Matt, Joseph, and Peter. You picked one of the best Star Trek Attack Wing minds in the game. Certainly, I think the Star Trek Alliance co-op plan is as strong as it is because of his involvement. And frankly, Joe had also never played Heroes of the Aturi Cluster, and neither had Tommy, for whom doing something with Attack Wing was a real passion. So having the two of them look at what had been done in Heroes and kind of re-examine it again for fiddliness resulted in some other changes, which we were then able to leverage further in some of the scenarios. Like X-Wing, even Heroes, I guess it has turbo laser towers, but one of the things we were able to stick back into Attack Wing was there's a Cardassian weapons platform token. It's a disc, and you get a bunch of those in the box. And it was a really fun way to cheat and get a second unit without having a second piece of plastic model that had to be put in the box. Because the punchboard sheet's really cheap if we're already putting 6 of them in the box or whatever. I've got space for a couple of extra tokens. I can do a lot with a token if I put a stat line on it. And we did quite a lot. I think they're double-sided, so like they're 2 different things, one on either side. There's a broken Miranda class ship as a token. That does something as well. So we were able to get quite a lot of mileage out of not even having... I'm rummaging through the box here in the background. Not even having plastic for everything. Where's the... Scoop out the prototype bits here. Oh, yeah. I forgot about this guy. You can't have a Star Trek game without this guy. This ship I wish was in plastic. I looked at the entire product line for Attack Wing and I said, hey, where's my runabout? I want a miniature runabout because there's a Type 7 shuttle, and they're a little bit wonky. But I really, really wanted the runabout because there's a scenario where you have to save its bacon. And those of you who have played Heroes will probably look at that scenario and go, this seems like shades of Rescue Rebel Operatives, and you're not wrong. So that totally got it in the game, and you can actually see if I hold it up. If I get the backing on it, you can see it's notched at the front or the back. This token is the same size as a base. So if there ever exists, or if you want a custom one or 3D print one or whatever, you want to get a runabout model, you can replace this token with a plastic base with a ship model on top of it, and it will be the right size. It will play correctly. And incidentally, it's hard to see, but there's the destroyed Miranda class on the back. It's very, very badly destroyed. Probably to the point that it didn't need the maneuver template arrows on it, because I think it's space junk. Being told that I should be bugging WizKids about making a runabout model. Well, hey, look, man, if I get my way with Star Trek Alliance and we get to make more of it, I am absolutely going to find a way to put a runabout in there. That is something I want. Who knows? The future has many possibilities. We've continued to work with them, though, on not Alliance, actually. There's some other stuff coming down the pipeline with them I can't talk too much about yet, other than things are happening. Jeff says, Re-Alliance, is it a complete game? We're not Attack Wing players. Are the minis fully painted? I believe the minis will be fully painted. I have not seen a production sample of the game, so I can't say for sure. But everything else in Attack Wing is pre-paints. There are unpainted... They reused the models and released them as unpainted ones in something called the Deep Cuts line, which I guess you could get extras of and paint them that way. And it's a good way to get some of the rarer, harder to get Federation ships now. Because the early wave Attack Wing stuff is like all of the tried and true standby ships, and a lot of them just are really, really hard to get now. That was actually part of the reason we picked the Akira class as one of the 2 ships in the box. Because the game takes place over the Dominion War storyline from DS9, for which the Akira class was basically commissioned. It's commissioned for that and the Borg, and that point in Federation history. And the fact that the Akira class model was rare in actual manufacturing, not very desirable in competitive play because it was underpowered, and didn't really have any desirable upgrades in it. 3 strikes against that model. They didn't make very many of them, and the ones they did make are really, really hard to find and really expensive. Most players have 0 to 1 Akira classes in their collection, and it's one of my favorite ship designs, so those 4 factors together were like, no-brainer forehead slap. We should really have an Akira class in this box because I want one. And you should want one too because I'm putting in cards that make it better and viable. So you should do that. But yes, fully painted. And the fact that this is... Alliance is actually a core set. So it has a damage deck, it has dice, it has rulers, it has all the tokens, it has all the player cards. It doesn't have dials for the Jem'Hadar fighters, so you actually can't play it competitively. It doesn't have the competitive play cards for the Dominion ships because they're actually superfluous. The AI ships have their own big fancy stat card things, which have been shown and talked about before. And if you know Heroes, the Jem'Hadar ship is basically a TIE fighter. It has a similar card that operates its AI. But the whole point was to design a game that would be not only for people that played Attack Wing but didn't really like the competitive play aspect of it, but also to specifically make a purchasable product that is the Heroes of the Aturi Cluster style experience with some tighter controls on it because I'm designing the card pool. Some better thought out progression across a series of scenarios. As much as I like Heroes of the Aturi Cluster's starting mission deck design, in some ways it actually hamstrings the progression in Heroes and made balancing some of the scenarios more difficult than it would otherwise need to be. I really, really love that mission deck design in Heroes of the Aturi Cluster. The whole thing where you have multiple story threads, but they're in pieces, so they're like 3 acts per story, but you take all the cards for Act 1 and shuffle them together. And every time you finish a card, it replaces it with a different card. So there's this kind of floating, rotating pool of missions that you can select from that kind of represent different things happening in the same area, theater of operations where your squadron is, but you're not beholden to doing them in a particular order, I think with one exception. I think Revenge, if you draw it, is a must. But there's a whole kind of fascinating design space to me about the scenario that wraps the scenario, right? The meta layer of managing the squad of ships that I think Heroes never quite scratched for me. I had some early designs about it, but we never really got there. And I'm really excited to be able to do another game in the future that will have that mission deck. Alliance actually doesn't have it at all. There is no mission deck in Alliance. All of the scenarios are built in a tree, but they are very specifically first, second, third. Like they're gated by level, and you only ever progress through the tree forward. So it's not quite as wide open in terms of the order that you can do them in, but the way the story develops and the way that you follow that story through is a much more cohesive, overarching narrative, where Heroes is kind of like, it feels episodic. You go and play this one episode. Oh, okay. We made that guy angry. There's now an Imperial ace on our tail from that mission. Okay, well, if we play that the next one in that mission arc, then we're going to find the continuation there. But you could just as soon decide that was horrible. I never want to play that arc again. We're going to not do that mission if we have the choice. and never go back to it, which felt a little weird to me. And ultimately, it made a cool gameplay experience for Heroes because you could sort of tailor it, but it also made it a little bit more difficult to design and a little more difficult to balance. Dylan's a big fan of reminding me, what do we gain versus what does it cost? And Alliance, even though it was designed sort of pretty well done before Dylan came on, that same rule is very much a thing that I learned from earlier Heroes of the Aturi cluster. I look at some of the things, designing a campaign game around Heroes or even around Alliance. Heroes in 2015 and Alliance in like 2016, 2017. I guess actually probably 2018 the files were done because we were expecting it to be out 2019 originally. But I've done a lot of additional game design and development since then. Terminator Genisys happened, which is a real crucible of learning how to balance and write interesting scenarios. And since then, Divinity. And, the amount of effort that we put into making that game interesting and having different flavors of those scenarios and objectives. I think I've learned a lot about the whole kind of concept of the scenario design and how to do it in a streamlined way, how to get a lot done with few components. There's a lot of these kinds of things about it. And I feel like I have a much better handle on it now. And I probably should, because I have 5 more years of experience since having done Heroes. This is my personal booklet for Heroes, and it is not even a nice one. This is a cheapie from some web printing place. What is it? The cobbler's kids have no shoes. It's like I have the worst looking prototype of Heroes of the Aturi cluster. I think most people that have played it probably have nicer looking ones. Let's see. Anybody else? Yeah, other flight games with miniatures. Good old Wings of Glory, formerly Wings of War. Cool. Well, thank you all for the solidarity. I see Jeff saying he's going to buy Alliance just for solidarity. Appreciate that. I am a big Star Trek fan as well as a big Star Wars fan, so having a campaign that I can now play plastic spaceships for either of those settings with is something I'm really happy about. But I hope that kind of gave you some idea of like the thought process that goes into the sorts of things we think about when we're doing these scenario design pieces. I think I still firmly believe that like the best games are yet to be made in some ways, and there's so much inspiration and so much good, wide range of variety, good scenario design and storytelling happening in games now with such this huge push towards narrative games that I think it's going to be really exciting to see how a lot of these things shape up. I'm going to wrap up in probably about 5 minutes, so if you guys have any last questions or anything you want to just get in there. And again, if you want to specifically talk about or you want to hear about a particular facet of something that we're working on at Linvander, or something that you think might be a cool topic for a stream, by all means, drop me a like and leave a comment below, and we'll get to that probably next week or in the future. I do keep a log of possible topics, so it's kind of random what I pick each week, but if there's something that there's a demand from you guys to talk about or to hear about, I would love to hear from you. Typhurian says, looking forward to getting Alliance and planning to get 2 sets. 2 thumbs up for that. TK1138 says, just waiting for a new Dune board game to come out if the movie gets popular. I know Dylan is a big Dune fan. I've only read the first novel, but I enjoy it. I'm definitely on board to see the film. Kostia says, how is Divinity going along? The only thing I can say about Divinity on this stream is, well, things are going really well. They're happy, we're happy, things are moving along, lots of playtesting is getting done. There'll be another Kickstarter update pretty soon, actually. Kieran just asked me for more content to put in it, so I sent him some pictures of new cards. So you guys get some swag in the next Divinity update. And we'll talk about it there. The relatively new Dune board game from GF9 is a reprint of the old Dune board game. And Direwolf plus Renegade are doing a game. Yep, there's a few. So that's exciting. Lots of things happening there. Jeff says, don't go beyond Doom 3 if you value your sanity. Quack says, when you design miniatures, do you consider the pull direction? Interesting. That's a question for manufacturing. I'm going to file that one away for future. Because I think I probably have... if I can get permission from Larian to show some minis for Divinity, that's been a hell of a process. We have a couple of sculptors we work with, and a lot of the art direction for miniatures for Divinity has been going back and forth between me and them, and with Larian too, of course. So that'll totally be a stream at some point in the future. We can talk about all of that, because that's been wild. Anyway, thank you all for tuning in. It's been a lovely 65 minutes. I will be back on Friday. If you're new to the stream, if you're new to the stream and you want to hear more about kind of the stuff we're working on or this sort of game design type stuff, absolutely subscribe to our channel. We've got streams on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, different person each day. I'm always on Friday. And now that we're not doing conventions all the time, I am actually doing them the majority of Fridays, which is why I have so few. But by all means, if you want to hear more about this stuff or more stuff you would like to hear me talk about, let me know, and we will see you in a week's time. Stay safe, friends. Bye for now.